Hi everyone, Kate here. We weren't planning to upcycle again this soon, but we've decided to take a small hiatus. We are going to upcycle our next 3 episodes, so through September, and then we will be back in earnest in October. We also aren't going to put out a bonus episode in September. I'm sorry. Larkin and I both just really need a break as we navigate some personal stuff, and also just because we've never taken a true hiatus since starting the podcast, and we've earned it, and we're excited to give you some of these bonus episodes because we're proud of them. I'm particularly proud of this one. I hope I did Jacob's story justice and that you will become as haunted by it as I have been my entire life. We already know what we want to do in October. We're very excited. So please stick around, keep listening, keep telling your friends and your enemies. And thank you as ever for being the best audience that 2 Debbie Downers could ask for.
You're having a good time on the couch with your friends. You're having a good time in the bed alone. You're having a good time watching TV. Let us ruin your day. Yay!
Welcome, wonderful gin and tonics folks, to another bonus episode of Now It's Ruined. I am in a closet this time, just trying some stuff out because they're landscaping, and we could have done this another day, but instead I said, no, let me try and shove myself in several different spaces in my home to minimize the noise. This is a really dark one, guys, and I'm sorry about that. I feel like I do that a lot. Like, I really bring the darkness a lot of the time, but this comes out the same day as our Halloween episode, which will be slightly lighter. If you happen to be listening to this one first, I advise you to listen to that one maybe afterward as a palate cleanser, or go listen to something really light and happy, or, you know, watch a cartoon or something. I do need to issue a major trigger warning for child sexual abuse and violence against children ahead of this episode. I apologize for doing another case where children were brutally harmed, but this is a case that has been in my consciousness for basically my entire life. And I really wanted to talk about it because I feel like a lot of people don't know about it, even though it was definitely national news.
I have no idea what's happening, you guys.
Yeah, like every time I bring it up, even to like seasoned true crime people, they're like, I don't know what this is. So, not to date myself, but I was born in 1987. See, it's funny because I literally dated myself after saying I didn't want to do it. I'm funny. Since I was born in the 80s, I grew up in a time when kids were constantly warned about stranger danger. The way that the news and schools talked about it, you would think that there's literally like a man in a van on every street just trying to tempt kids into the van with puppies and candy and shit. I'm sure you remember it too. You probably got it growing up in the 90s.
Yeah. People in every bush.
For those of you, though, who are of a younger ilk, let me run down the stranger danger situation for you. So we now know that a vast majority of child abductions, around 99%, are committed by someone that the child knows. But a string of high-profile cases in the late 70s and in the 80s brought forth this panic about stranger abductions. And the rise of the stranger danger concept can be traced back to the disappearance of Etan Patz in 1979. Etan was just 6 years old when he took his first walk by himself to his bus stop 2 blocks from his house in Manhattan, and he never made it to the bus, and he has never been found. In 2017, a man named Pedro Hernandez was convicted of kidnapping and murdering Etan, but he just actually had a new trial ordered because of mismanaged jury instructions, so like a procedural thing. So we'll see what happens there. There's been an update in this case since we recorded this episode last October. The Supreme Court has denied Pedro Hernandez's retrial, so his conviction stands.
Can you imagine? It's his first walk by himself?
I know.
Oh my God.
There are a lot of details in this episode that are just like unimaginably heartbreaking. I can't imagine being those parents.
There's something about the 70s that like, that was the uptick in, you know, hitchhiker abductions. That was the kidnapping of children. And it's like, what, because I mean, there's always been violence, but like there was something that shifted in the United States specifically, like culturally, or was it cars? We already had cars. Like what? Yeah,
but I was just thinking, like, thinking back on our road signs episode, you know, like, there was more cross-country travel, I think, starting to happen. There were more interstate highways that were built probably by that time, and so there might have been more interstate travel by that time, but also just more attention being paid, wider reporting, more of a, like, TV news cycle, so we know about things happening.
I see, right.
I think culturally hitchhiking was a thing that kind of just ticked up in that kind of free love era in like the 60s and
Yeah.
70s, and like,
I want to travel the country, and
right.
this is the sexy, romantic, like beatnik way to do it.
Yeah, I read Jack Kerouac and now
Right. Yeah. So I caught myself in the trap of like, it's always existed, but there's just more reporting about it and there's more knowledge about it.
Yeah, and there might be more to it too that I did not get into.
Yeah,
in this.
no,
So it's an interesting question. We should look into it more. So yeah, Little Etan, national news. This episode isn't focused on him though, so I'm not going to talk more about his case. It's really sad, but his disappearance got national attention. It was huge, and it was followed by several other high-profile cases, including that of Adam Walsh in 1981. Adam's father, John Walsh, has been a very vocal victims advocate ever since Adam's disappearance, and he and Adam's mother helped co-found the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And then John also went on to create and host America's Most Wanted, which was, that's how you know John
that's
Walsh.
how it is. Okay.
Yep.
I was like,
Staple of the 90s. So that was the TV show, for those who don't know, that they profiled a crime and then they asked the public to help them like catch fugitives. So that was what John Walsh did with his life after Adam was abducted and sadly murdered. So this string of disappearances caused a national panic about strangers abducting children, and it caused a huge advocacy movement that changed the way that law enforcement responds to these kinds of crimes. The faces of missing kids were put on milk cartons, making the number of missing kids even more kind of noticeable and in everybody's faces. Schools held stranger danger lectures to warn kids not to get in cars with strangers under any circumstances. We were told people would try anything to get us into cars and trick us. They would pretend to be police officers, pretend to need help with something, claim to know our parents, all of that stuff. We were told to look out for these like tricky strangers. When I was a kid, I don't remember getting a single talk about what to do if the person abusing you was a trusted adult.
No.
I don't think I ever got that information. So the stranger quickly became the new national boogeyman used to scare kids all over the U.S. And for a lot of kids, this boogeyman maybe felt like a faraway monster story. But where I grew up, we knew he was real. Because in 1989, just 2 years after I was born, he snatched up a kid in St. Joseph, Minnesota, less than an hour from my hometown.
Oh, that close.
Yeah. I've known that kid's name for as long as I can remember. Hearing it terrified me before I could even understand why. To this day, it sends a chill down my spine because I can still hear the warnings that were given to us. Don't talk to strangers or you'll go missing like Jacob Wetterling. I literally looked this up. My house to Jacob Wetterling's house, door to door, 46 minutes.
Whoa.
I remember news reports. Like, I have this very distinct memory of one, it must have been an anniversary, where it was just an image of like a bicycle in a ditch with its wheels spinning. His case was really prominent where I lived. And so I was surprised, as I said earlier, when I moved away and people hadn't heard of him. Like, so I wanted to talk about him here because I want all of you to be as haunted as I have been my entire life.
Well, thank you.
This case is huge. It spans decades. It has a lot of twists and turns, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything in the time we have. If you want a really thorough, excellent coverage of the case, I highly recommend listening to season 1 of the In the Dark podcast by APM Reports. They're a Minnesota-based media company, and the whole season is about the case. So it's like 8 episodes just about this. I will obviously drop the link in the show notes. It's really good. And I used it and the companion articles from it as the main source for this episode. Again, trying not to just copy what other people have already done, but it was very helpful.
Of course.
I wrote this in a day, actually, because it was so well laid out for me. Shout out APM. So Jacob was born in 1978 and grew up in St. Joseph, Minnesota, which is a small town that's part of the larger St. Cloud area. He had a typical Minnesota childhood that I find incredibly relatable. He was the second oldest of 4 kids, and he loved fishing with his dad, Jerry, and he was enthusiastic about football and hockey. He loved animals and was thinking about becoming a vet, just like I did for a while. He'd also just started playing the trombone, which is the instrument that I picked up in 5th grade, which is he was in 6th grade. He was creative. He was fun. He made friends easily. His mom, Patty, said his favorite meal was steak dinner with mashed potatoes, just like super normal, seemingly well-adjusted Minnesota boy. On October 22nd, 1989, 36 years ago to the day when we are releasing this episode, Jacob and his family had a super Minnesotan day. Like if this was a fictional screenplay and I saw this day play out as like the setup, I'd be like, wow, someone's really trying to establish that they're in Minnesota. Really heavy-handed Minnesotan shit. But it's real. This is what they did. So in the morning, he and his dad went fishing. Minnesota Classic. There are lakes every 3 feet. Then they came home and watched the Minnesota Vikings play the Detroit Lions. Football, Minnesota football. And then they went to a skating rink.
Oh my gosh.
The only more Minnesotan thing would have been if they had gone skating on like a frozen lake or pond. But
right.
Skating rink will do. In the evening, Jacob's parents went to a gathering at a friend's house about 20 miles from their house. Jacob's older sister Amy was at a friend's house, so Jacob, who was 11 at the time, was in charge of his younger brother Trevor, who was 10, and his sister Carmen, who was 8. Jacob's best friend Aaron was also over. They were having a sleepover, which was I looked it up. It was a Sunday, and I'm like, you're having a sleepover on a Sunday? Bold move. But maybe they had the day off from school the next day,
or they were chill parents.
Yeah, or chill parents, and they were just going to go to school together the next day. I had one or two of those school night sleepovers where we were like, yeah, and we'll get up and go the next day. And then as we're like just playing through and staying up the whole 24 hours. Yeah, really great. Yeah. So the boys ate some pizza, and then they decided they wanted to do something else many people of a certain age will relate to. They wanted to rent a movie.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Remember going into the Blockbuster?
I never had a Blockbuster where I grew up. Actually, where I grew up, it was very similar to Jacob's situation because there was no big movie rental store, so they had to go to the local convenience store to rent movies, which is what
funny.
We had to do. We actually used to go to the hardware store, and there was like one shelf of like 30 movies. I rented a lot of like the old George of the Jungle cartoon in those days.
You have a very limited selection.
Mm-hmm. And you just rent the same thing every Friday. But eventually we were blessed with a Mr. Movies. It's Minnesotan Blockbuster, basically. Josh Hartnett worked at a Mr. Movies.
Oh, I even remember the smell of the video store.
Yeah, it's almost like a bookstore. You're like, what is
kind
that?
Of, but
plastic? I don't know.
Yeah, it's plasticky and the carpet and just wandering around for way too long looking at.
Oh, yeah. If you had a friend that worked there, you just hung out there. My sister used to do that. Her friend worked at the Mr. Movies. And so she and her friends would go into the Mr. Movies and, you know, they would have TV screens showing like the new release or whatever the person working wanted to watch. And so they would like put on Tommy Boy and just hang out in the Mr. Movies with their friend who worked there and watch Tommy Boy. I do love having a lot of options of things to watch on demand, but there was a kind of nice simplicity about being limited. So they had to go to their local convenience store, the Tom Thumb, which is also a Minnesota staple. We had one in my town. Again, I'm telling you, when I learned more about this case, I was like, this was my childhood. Like, and he was less than an hour from me, which makes sense. But I was just like, down to the fucking Tom Thumb? Are you kidding me?
It's really, chilling.
It was already dark by the time they decided they wanted to go. And there weren't any streetlights on the way to the Tom Thumb. They lived in a really rural area. There was not a lot around. So when Trevor called their mom to ask permission to bike to the store, Patty said no. Trevor did the classic kid move and was like, well, can I talk to Dad? And Patty was like, all right. And Jerry was also worried about it being too dark, but his concern was like, they're going to get hit by a car. It's not safe to ride your bikes at night, so no. But Trevor promised that he would carry a flashlight and that Jacob would wear a reflective vest to make sure that they were safe. So Jerry caved and said yes. The boys could not leave 8-year-old Carmen at home alone. That was a step too far, even for the 80s. So they called their neighbor Rochelle, who was 14, to come watch Carmen while they went to get the movie. Very responsible.
Responsible. Yeah,
responsible kiddos. And Jacob and Trevor, continuing their responsibility, were true to their word. Trevor carried a flashlight that he shone in front of the boys as they biked to the store. Jacob wore a reflective vest over his later iconic red jacket. The ride to the store was uneventful, though they did hear a rustling in a cornfield at one point, which is just a
no.
Corn is terrifying. I grew up around it, still don't like it. Nope.
I didn't grow up around it, and I've never liked that.
The boys rented a movie that is also an absolute core memory for me. They rented The Naked Gun.
No.
Yes, my dad loved that movie. I watched it about a bazillion times as a kid. It's how I learned who O.J. Simpson was, because I was like, that guy's funny. And he was like, yeah, well, he murdered some people.
Yeah, well,
my dad
honey.
did not pull punches. I rewatched The Naked Gun recently, and I was like, oh my God, I remember literally every beat of this movie. I could probably still mostly quote it beginning to end. I certainly could when I was a kid. Jacob, Trevor, and Aaron rented The Naked Gun, and then they started the 15-minute ride back to the Wetterling's house. It was very close. Trevor was shining the flashlight ahead of them again as they passed a whole lot of nothing. Really, as I said, it was pretty isolated. There were a few houses, some woods, and of course, the cornfields. As they approached a long gravel driveway right around the spot where they'd heard the rustling in the corn earlier, a man appeared in the road. He approached the boys, told them he had a gun, and told them to lie down in the ditch. He was dressed completely in black, and something was covering his face. At first, Aaron thought they were being pranked by an older kid, maybe. It was like around Halloween. Teenagers are fucking punks. He was like, maybe some older kid is playing like a deranged trick on us. The man told Trevor to turn off the flashlight, which he did. Then he asked Trevor how old he was, and Trevor responded 10. The man then told Trevor to run as fast as he could toward the woods and not look back or he'd shoot. And Trevor ran. The man now turned his attention to Aaron, asking him how old he was. When Aaron said he was 11, the man grabbed Aaron's crotch and groped him. Then he asked Jacob his age, and Jacob told him he was 11 too. And at this point, the man told Aaron the same thing he told Trevor, run as fast as you can into the woods or I will shoot you. And Aaron ran. And when he looked back, there was no sign of Jacob or the man. And that was the last time anyone saw Jacob alive.
Whew.
Yeah. Terrifying shit. Aaron and Trevor ran as fast as they could back to the Wetterlings' house, where they burst in and told an increasingly terrified Rochelle, who, remember, was just 14 years old, that a man with a gun had just taken Jacob. And Rochelle very smartly called her dad, who called Patty and Jerry first and then 911. And he put Trevor on the phone with 911 to describe the man. But of course, like, Trevor didn't have much to go on. He did his best, but it was dark and it's a terrifying situation. And the man had a mask on, so all he could really say was the boys didn't know him. He was kind of short. He sounded like he had a cold and he hadn't seen a car anywhere. He and Aaron were both adamant about that. We didn't see a car. So the first cop to arrive at the Wetterlings' home was a deputy who'd only been on patrol for a few months, Bruce Bechtold. And he got to the house at 9:38, which is about 20 minutes after Jacob had been abducted, which was around 9:20. He tried to get the boys to come with him to show where the abduction had happened, but they were too terrified to do this with a stranger, even a cop. So Rochelle's dad offered to go with them, and they agreed, and they went and they showed him. And since it was literally around the corner, like they were almost back to the house when Jacob was snatched.
That's so fucked.
Yeah. And so it didn't take long. They took him over, showed him where it was, and then came back. And then they were waiting for Jerry and Patty to arrive. On the drive back from their friend's house, Patty said she felt like Jerry was driving way too slowly, but he didn't want to get pulled over and be delayed further. And Patty was like, well, if we get pulled over, we're going to tell them our son was just kidnapped and we're going to have a police escort and we'll get home faster. So just hit the gas.
Yeah, go.
And then Patty said something to Jerry that she has always regretted. She said, well, who told them that they could go to the store?
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Jerry responded, I did. So if you want to be mad at somebody, be mad at me.
Oh.
Patty has said that those first few days, she really was expecting them to just find him and it would be over really fast. Like, I don't think she would have said that to him later down the line. So when Jerry and Patty got home, Trevor and Aaron were understandably distraught. Trevor couldn't stop talking. He just kept trying to explain to his parents what had happened to his brother. Aaron stood in a corner just biting his nails. Patty said he looked like he just wanted to disappear. By this time, investigators from the Stearns County Sheriff's Office had arrived and were feeling skeptical of the boys' story, which is kind of understandable. It is nuts. It maybe should have been a little more within the realm of possibility for these particular cops, given things I will discuss later about other cases in the area, but we will put a pin in that for now. So the cops were trying to give Aaron and Trevor an out. They were like, are you sure you weren't playing with a gun and maybe it went off and Jacob got hurt and you're just trying to cover? Are you sure Jacob didn't run away and maybe you're trying to give him more time to get further? Like they were trying to give them all of these options. And Trevor and Aaron are like, no, this is what happened. So eventually the cops have to take them seriously.
Which, just listen to children.
Yeah, but also,
I get it. I get it also, but it's just this, I can't, it makes me see a certain level of red when it's like, we just don't show children any level of respect. Listen to them. Figure out the details later, maybe, but can you just
start
trust
at least
them?
Pursuing that train of it? Yeah. Which I guess some other cops probably were. Bechtold was over at the scene already, looking around. So Stearns County is big. It's huge, but it's sparsely populated, or at least it was at this time. It was like a collection of small towns that contained mostly farmland. But despite this, the sheriff's office was actually very well funded, which I just want you to bear in mind because some of these blunders that happened could be dismissed as mistakes of like a small underfunded sheriff's department. That was not the case. So the sheriff at the time was a guy named Charlie Graft, and he had been a police officer for 37 years. This is crazy. I had to include this because it's just so nuts. It's kind of off topic. But when Charlie Graft started as a cop, he was literally the only police officer in his entire town, and they had no dispatch, they had no squad cars. So he would literally go out in his own car and drive around to patrol, just to see if anything was going on. And he would periodically drive past his house because people would call his house to report crimes, and when that happened, his wife would turn the porch light on so he would know to come in and hear like what the crime was and go investigate it.
That is wild.
Nuts. Graft arrived at the Wetterlings' house about 10 p.m., so less than an hour from when Jacob was missing. The assumption was that Jacob and his abductor were in the woods near the Wetterlings' house, so the Graft called in the fire department to go and sweep the woods and try and flush them out. He also called in a helicopter with a searchlight, and they searched the woods for an hour and a half, but no Jacob, no strange man. The driveway near the abduction site proved a little more interesting than the woods. Investigators found shoe prints from an adult and a smaller set that they presumed were from a child. They also found tire tracks, but they weren't totally sure whether those were tied to the crime because it's like tire tracks in a driveway, not that incriminating. And the boys insisted they hadn't seen a car, so they weren't sure that the man had a car. But they felt like he must have in order to pull off this disappearance in a rural area, because it's not like a city where you can just duck into the subway or duck into a building and get lost in a crowd. Like, to get him out of there like that and make him disappear, they were like, he must have had a car. So they took casts of the tracks. As the cops searched the area around the driveway, they caught the attention of the man who lived at the top of that driveway, Dan Rassier. Dan was 33 at the time. He was a music teacher. And on the night of the abduction, he was home alone with his dog, Smokey, on the farm where his family had lived since 1931. He remembers Smokey barking around 9 p.m. and he looked out his window to see that there were headlights coming up his driveway. And he said it was a small, dark car. Its headlights were close together, but he couldn't see anything about the driver. And the car turned around and headed back toward the road. So Dan was like, oh, someone's just turning around in my driveway, which used to happen to us all the time. We also had a long gravel driveway. So Dan really didn't think anything of it, and he went to bed. And then he woke up later when Smokey started barking again, and he looked outside to see people with flashlights poking around his wood pile, and he was like, fucking punks are coming to steal my firewood.
Get out of here.
He initially went down and went to go outside and confront them, but then he was like, maybe I'm being stupid and there are like a bunch of dudes out here that I should maybe not confront by myself. So he thought again and he went in and called the police instead to report that there were people in his yard, and the dispatcher told him that a child had been abducted there and they were police officers who were searching for him. So Dan went out and he talked to Bechtold, that deputy newbie, and Dan offered to search the buildings on his farm for the police, and they were like, sure. So he did. He didn't find anything. And later he was like, I should have just insisted they come into my house and search everything top to bottom themselves, because it would have spared him a world of hurt.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah. But he didn't. And the cops didn't seem to care too much about Dan that night, despite being the person who lived in a house at the end of the driveway. Right?
We're not going to...
Don't want to talk to him? Nope.
Not interested. He's not... Okay.
He had to come out and talk to them. I don't think they were even going to knock on his door. And they didn't after that point. They didn't knock on his door that night. In fact, it seems like they didn't really knock on anybody's doors that night, which is pretty much policing 101. The cops on duty that night claim they did. They claim they canvassed the whole neighborhood. But only a couple of neighbors have said that they recalled being spoken to by police, and others were actually struck by the fact that they weren't talked to. Several people who saw Jacob, Aaron, and Trevor just minutes before their abduction that night weren't interviewed until weeks later.
Oh my God. You've told me about eyewitness accounts and how you need to get those as soon as possible.
They're always unreliable, but they're getting more and more unreliable as time goes on. In the articles that I was reading, they interview other people and they're like, so how long has it been procedure to just knock on doors after a crime? And he was like, I don't know, since Sherlock Holmes was written, forever. Anyway, yeah, it's just going to get more infuriating from here, folks. So Jerry Klapake, I actually don't know how to say his name. I should have looked it up. Klaphake. So I'm going to say Klapke because I feel like that's... Yeah. So he was one of the men in the neighborhood. And sadly, in the chaos after Jacob went missing, his dog got run over by a car. And he wanted to bury the dog, but he was like, maybe I shouldn't have a fresh grave in my yard when a child is missing, because that'll look suspicious. So he asked his neighbor to come and witness the burial, just in case, please attest that this is my dog. The neighbor did. And then Jerry waited anxiously to be questioned about a fresh grave in his yard, but nobody ever asked him about it, leading him to be like, okay, so if they missed that, what else did they miss? Because holy shit, guys.
And if you just have sweet Minnesotan rural neighbors concerned about a police investigation, you done messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Because those are the people who trust the cops.
Yeah, they have no reason not to. I always did. When I was one of these Minnesotan kiddos in a town just like this, yeah, of course. Cops are the people you go to when the stranger talks to you, right? You look for a policeman in a uniform. So on top of them missing an obvious fresh grave, Klapicki's son, Adam, gave some pretty compelling information to the police that was basically ignored. So Adam was 14 at the time of Jacob's abduction, and he was friends with Jacob, and they even kind of looked alike. And when Adam was 9 or 10, he went to retrieve a rogue kickball from a ditch near his house when he was grabbed from behind in a bear hug by a man with glasses and a dark, raspy voice. And when Adam's sister called for him to come back, the man said to him, "You're lucky your sister called you." And he threw him down, and Adam got away.
I'm gonna throw up.
So this is like 4 years, 5 years earlier. And this actually, it reminds me, not quite as dramatic, but like when I was a kid, I have this memory of being at a park with a babysitter. I don't remember which babysitter it was. I don't think it was someone who babysat for me often, but she took me to a park near my house. And I remember just noticing that she was getting really nervous. And I remember clocking that there was a man in a car sitting there watching us. After a while, she was like, "We're going to go to my friend's house who lives right here." Because I lived it was like a few blocks walk. And she snatched me up. And I remember feeling her panic.
Whoa.
And she brought me to this friend's house and I think called the cops. And I just remember being in a house that like I didn't know. And because of all the stranger danger lectures I had gotten, I think I kind of knew what was going on. But it was like, thank God she was vigilant and on her shit. I don't know if he was there for her or for me. Could have gone either way. But, terrifying.
If only she had been on the police force.
Yeah, right. Yeah. They really could have used my childhood babysitter on the Stearns County Sheriff's Office.
Someone
payroll.
with a head on a swivel. Come on.
Seriously. So as if that story weren't enough, Adam also reported that just a couple of months before Jacob's abduction, he and a friend were chased by a blue car as they were walking home in the dark from the same Tom Thumb that Jacob, Trevor, and Aaron had been at. And they escaped into a nearby garage where the car pulled into the driveway and shone its brights on them before driving away. Adam described the car as small, blue, boxy, maybe a Pontiac. Like he and his friend had the deets. They saw the driver pretty clearly. Obviously, when Jacob disappeared, Adam immediately thought of both of these incidents, but especially the recent one with the car. And so he waited for police to come and talk to them, but they never did. So after a few days, he asked his dad to take him to a nearby station so that he could report it.
These kids, dude.
The children should be the Stearns County Sheriff's Office. So according to Adam, he told the local police and the FBI about the car, but none of them ever followed up with him about it. He was so haunted by this that 15 years later, with Jacob still missing and no leads in sight, he went back to the police to remind them about the experience with the blue car, and he offered to take the detective on a drive through the neighborhood to see where it was and where it happened, but the detective wasn't interested. So Adam left the station absolutely fucking furious, understandably so. And then even more years passed and his memory was fading. So eventually he asked police out of curiosity if he could see the transcript of the report he'd given as a kid. And he was stunned to see that he and his friend who was with him both provided very clear, extremely similar descriptions of the car and the event. Both said they could identify the driver in a lineup, but neither of them was ever asked anything more.
Fucking joking.
And as I'll get to in a bit, Adam's stories were only the tip of the iceberg as far as what was going on around St. Joseph at the time. Back to the night of the abduction. About 3 a.m., roughly 6 hours after Jacob had been abducted, the police made the decision to call off the search, such as it was. They were no closer to figuring out who took him or where he could be, and his disappearance was a complete mystery. And it would stay that way for nearly 27 years. So for my entire childhood, we did not know what happened to Jacob Wetterling. He just disappeared. He was snatched and he was gone. The community of St. Joseph quickly rallied around the Wetterlings and started to look for Jacob themselves. Hundreds of people searched the town top to bottom. They made flyers. They posted them everywhere. The week after he went missing, a chain of people 3 miles long was formed on the main road, including 2 players from the Minnesota Twins. So this was starting to get massive attention. And cops, to be clear, were not just sitting around doing nothing. Like Sheriff Graft called in help from every law enforcement agency he could think of. By the end of the week, nearly 100 officers from the FBI, state investigation agencies, and local police departments throughout Minnesota were working the case. I just realized as I was writing this, like, my dad was probably on the lookout for stuff because he worked near the Twin Cities. The National Guard was called. More helicopters were flown around. The search for Jacob actually eventually became one of the largest searches for any single missing child in the history of the United States. His red jacket that he was wearing became the symbol of the search. It was what everyone was told to look out for because cops figured it would be easy to see, easy to identify. But despite pleading for leads from the public, the cops still didn't interview everyone who lived on the road where Jacob was abducted. So,
like, and I was trying to give him a little bit of a benefit of the doubt because, and you and I have talked about this in every like true crime documentary we watch. It's always these small towns where the cops are like, I've never had anything like this happen.
Right.
But it's all so just common sense. I don't care.
And the FBI is involved at this point.
The FBI is there. You have resources.
So Jerry and Patty, demonstrating a strength and resilience I cannot even comprehend, gave interviews nearly every single day to maximize publicity around the case. They had hope that they were going to bring Jacob home alive somehow, and that he might be found anywhere. Like at this point, as the days go on, it's like, he could be literally anywhere in the world. In this barrage of interviews, they were subjected to a particularly infuriating one conducted by the ever unscrupulous Geraldo Rivera.
Joyous.
Geraldo brought along John Walsh, the aforementioned father of Adam Walsh and host of America's Most Wanted. Geraldo sat Patty and Jerry down in their basement and pushed them to consider the worst possibilities of what had happened to Jacob. Patty pushed back, saying she was choosing not to live in the world of dark scenarios that Geraldo was trying to spin for her. She chose to believe that Jacob was still alive and that they were going to be able to bring him home, because how else do you fucking go on?
How she didn't scratch his dumb little eyeballs out.
So after Patty said this, John Walsh piped the fuck up and said he knew what they were going through, and, he knew why they were trying to cope by believing in the hopeful possibility that Jacob was okay. But he also said the harsh reality was that lots of kids are taken, quote, by someone who is into sexually assaulting children, and if you're lucky, you'll find the body in a field. He said that to these parents on national television.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Geraldo responded by asking John Walsh what the Wetterlings could do in this horrible scenario. Are they, he asked, powerless now to the whimsy, the awful capriciousness of this madman? Direct quote. To which John Walsh said, that would be my opinion. So he's basically like, you have no control. This guy has your kid. He's probably already killed him. He's probably done horrible sexual things to him, and you are not in control.
What was he possibly trying to accomplish with that?
I don't know if he's ever said anything to that he regrets anything around that. I didn't look into that. So it's entirely possible also that John Walsh has recanted. I don't know. I now have looked into it, and as far as I could tell, John Walsh has never apologized for those comments. Really upsetting to be Patty and Jerry in that moment. And Patty felt completely used. She was absolutely livid. And after the cameras turned off, she ripped off her mic and threw it on the ground. And she wanted to write Geraldo a letter telling him exactly what she thought of him, but her sister convinced her not to in case she needed him down the line. They needed the publicity. They needed to have him back. So instead, Patty took a breath and wrote Geraldo a thank you note. And
this woman, I got goosebumps.
Patty's
just now.
I love Patty. But the publicity the Wetterlings got did generate leads. Tons of leads, as you can imagine, and then those leads started generating leads, and the inevitable overwhelm began. Cops publicized a lead. Suddenly they got an onslaught of 10 more just like it. They're like, we've heard reports of a white van, and then suddenly everybody sees a white van, and they're getting bazillion reports of white vans everywhere. And in a detail I just absolutely hate, people were calling the Wetterlings directly and giving them tips and information. Because this is the day when, their number was listed. They were in the phone book. The Wetterlings were getting so many calls that the cops gave them a recording device so that they could record the calls, and they did. They recorded hundreds of them. And if you listen to the In the Dark podcast, you can hear some of them, and it is absolutely heartbreaking because you can just hear the exhaustion in their voices when they're on these calls. It is harrowing. People would call pretending to have Jacob. People would call pretending to be Jacob.
What?
Plus, of course, psychics started circling.
Oh, absolutely. No. Actually, fuck off.
They called the house telling Patty and Jerry all sorts of shit. And Patty had no time for those people. She was totally focused on facts. But Jerry, in his grief and desperation, latched on to anything and everything. He would go out on wild goose chases based on tips from psychics and spiritualists. He'd like go stand in the middle of the road where they would tell him to stand and like turn around 3 times, like whatever it was, he would do it. He was also sending Jacob's clothes and toys to people who were claiming to be psychics. So
Oh my God.
Jacob's possessions are being sent out. And Patty, she understood, obviously. 'Cause
Yeah.
She was like also in this crazy state of grief, but it did not help their relationship at the time. And Jerry now admits like it was crazy. You can't blame him. I mean, especially the guilt that he had to be carrying from letting them go.
Yeah.
When Patty said no, I can't even imagine.
Nope.
I would.
As soon as you said that, like at the very beginning of this, I was like, that guilt has got to have eaten that man
Absolutely.
alive. That grief brain and the shame and the guilt, you'll listen to anybody.
Absolutely.
You'll do anything.
And even if you don't believe it all the way.
Yeah.
You're like, well,
Sure, I'll try it.
what can it hurt,
Yeah, what could it hurt?
So the onslaught of leads meant that the search quickly expanded further and further away from the original crime scene, diverting resources away from the immediate area of Jacob's abduction. And one of the officers involved expressed surprise at being directed away from St. Joseph really early in the investigation. Like, he was like, we haven't even done due diligence in the neighborhood yet, so do you want me to maybe do that instead of chasing a report of a van in Montana, which is literally what he was told to do. And he suggested that. He was like, maybe just me and a couple other detectives could just, knock on doors in the neighborhood or start an investigation from the basics. And he was shot down. They were like, nope. Over the next 27 years, at least 70,000 leads poured in. Which brings us back to Dan Rassier, the man who lived at the top of the driveway where Jacob was abducted. Though the cops didn't seem too interested in Dan that night, they did go to the school the next day and talk to him, and in subsequent weeks they searched his house and administered a lie detector test and hypnosis, but they found no evidence of involvement with Jacob's disappearance. His tires didn't match the tire tracks, his shoes didn't match the shoe print, nothing. In 2003, a man stated that he had inadvertently driven through the crime scene and up Rassier's driveway on the night of the abduction. He was like, I didn't realize it. And he had, I guess, been percolating on this for a minute. And he was like, oh, shit, I might have been that car. Like,
oh, my God.
That just turned around in the driveway and left those tracks. The Stearns County Sheriff Department took this to mean that this man was responsible for the tracks at the scene and then followed that train of thought to the conclusion that, well, then, our theory about him having a car might be wrong. Maybe he was on foot. And in that case, where could he go? Dan Rassier's house. So Dan,
you're having this epiphany now?
Why isn't it that guy? I assume this guy, I don't know. You wouldn't have had an alibi because you were in the area. So like, how did they clear the other guy?
Who
was like, I was there
later? Okay.
No idea. Anyway, they chucked all the suspicion back on Dan and they ruthlessly grilled him. They tried to get him to confess. They did all the cop shit that plenty of people succumb to all the time, making false confessions. But Dan didn't. He stood strong. He didn't even hire a lawyer. He didn't think he needed to. He was like, I'm just going to tell the truth. In 2010, the cops brought a backhoe to Dan's farm and dug up huge chunks of his yard and his land. They seized several items from his home and, again, found no evidence tying him to the crime. But the damage was done. Concerned parents insisted that Dan's classes at school be supervised. He lost most of his private music students. His life was basically destroyed because of the accusations, which is why, as I said earlier, he really regrets not just telling the cops that they should search everything on his property that night right after the abduction. Because he's like,
but that's not his job.
Cleared. No, it is not Dan's job. They should have been like, a man who lives at the end of the driveway where this child disappeared, perhaps we should search this house. Yeah, and as I'm sure you can tell from my tone about Dan, he was not involved. But before we get to that, though, we need to go back to January 13th, 1989, about 9 months before Jacob was abducted. 12-year-old Jared Sherrill was ice skating with some friends that day in Cold Spring, Minnesota, which is about 10 miles from St. Joseph, where Jacob lived. And afterward, he and his friends went to a cafe, and then Jared and his best friend Corey walked home. And they lived in opposite directions, so at one point they had to split. And Jared actually asked Corey if he would walk him home, and Corey said no. As Jared walked by himself, a man in a blue car stopped and asked him for directions. Before Jared knew what was happening, the man jumped out of the car and rushed him, forcing him into the back with the threat of a gun. He made Jared lie down in the back seat with his hat over his eyes and drove off. And Jared remembers hearing a police scanner in the car, and he tried to keep track of where they were going by like counting turns, keeping track of when they were going over railroad tracks, and he actually did a really good job of this, which is super impressive for a 12-year-old. Again, put these kids on the police force. After about 10 or 15 minutes, the man stopped the car, climbed into the back seat, and sexually assaulted Jared. Afterward, he let Jared have his snowsuit back, but he kept his pants and underwear. And then he drove Jared to a spot about 2 miles from his house, let him out of the car, and told him to run and not look back, or he would shoot him. This is 9 months before Jacob disappears. The man also said to Jared that if the cops came close to finding out who he was, he would kill Jared. Jared described his attacker as short, wearing black army boots, fatigues, and a military-style watch. He said the man had a deep, raspy voice, just like Adam had described, and drove a blue car, which he said had a luggage rack and a blue interior. And he helped guide the police to where the man stopped and assaulted him. It was between Cold Spring and a town called Paynesville. 3 days after Jared's assault, a Stearns County Sheriff's deputy came up with a suspect from Paynesville, Danny Heinrich. When officers put Heinrich in a photo lineup with 5 other men, Jared picked him and 1 other man as possible matches for his attacker. So the cops go over to talk to Heinrich, but when they looked at his car, they noticed 2 discrepancies from Jared's description. There was no luggage rack, and the interior was a grayish color, not blue, which is like gray and blue.
What? And also,
please.
You're being traumatized.
No one's memory is perfect ever.
No, but he was so specific in his description up to that point.
Yeah, like he's going to get every detail absolutely right. Please. Anyway, Heinrich wasn't charged with Jared's attack. Neither was anybody else. And also nobody ever interviewed Jared's best friend, Corey, last person to be with him before the attack. Apparently the FBI came and took his hat because Jared had said that the man's hat looked kind of like his friend Corey's hat. And so they were like, I guess we'll take this hat. What are you talking? But they never talked to him. I want to talk a little bit about Danny Heinrich, the suspect. He had a troubled life. This included a sexual relationship with a man named Dwayne Hart, who was later found to have sexually assaulted a bunch of other young men in Heinrich's neighborhood. And it's unclear whether Heinrich and Hart were having sex while Heinrich was still underage, but it seems pretty likely that he was probably assaulted by Hart. Hart used to get young boys drunk and assault them. And when he did this, he drove them out to a particular area near a gravel pit just outside of Paynesville, which the abused boys called the Big Valley. Heinrich dropped out of high school and joined the National Guard. He had a string of petty crimes like burglary, break-ins, as well as multiple DWIs. And in 1986, less than 3 years before Jared's abduction, an officer pulled Heinrich over for drunk driving and confiscated a police scanner that Heinrich had in his car. So he was known to the local cops, and he was known to have a police scanner. In the mid-'80s, the police started getting reports of a man snatching boys off their bikes in Paynesville at night and trying to sexually assault them.
I'm going to need to leave.
I know. I know. I'm not laughing at the...
I know. I'm just going to smash something.
Infuriating. Yes, I know. It's going to get worse before it gets... It's never getting better, actually.
It's never getting better. It can't get better. There's nothing...
Many of these attacks in Paynesville happened just blocks from where Heinrich was living at the time. And guess what? Many victims described a short, stocky man in fatigues with a deep, raspy voice. Several said that he had asked them how old they were, and some also reported that he threatened to shoot them if they turned around.
For fuck's sake.
Mm-hmm. So Jared, the boy from Cold Spring, didn't know about the Paynesville boys. But when he heard about Jacob's abduction, he immediately saw the similarities to his own abduction that had happened just 9 months earlier. And the cops clearly saw a connection too, because one of the investigators in Jared's case, one of the guys who had interviewed Jared, showed him the lineup, looked at Heinrich's car, was also working Jacob's case. So he was like, ding, 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 right?
You would hope.
Oh, right. Though the police insist they knew immediately that the cases were connected, there's no evidence that they searched for Heinrich or went to Paynesville in the immediate aftermath of Jacob's disappearance. Instead, they started getting aggressive with Jared, the child who had been abducted. They interviewed him without his parents, and they demanded that he tell them who assaulted him. They were like, we know you know, just tell us. what in the actual fuck? I don't know. And despite him already having picked 2 guys out of a fucking photo lineup. Like, go do your job.
What
Go
else do you want from this boy?
Leave this child alone. So after a particularly aggressive interview, Jared's parents were like, we're done.
Done.
We're not. They moved away from Cold Spring to get away from it all, and they moved to Painesville, where Heinrich lived. So in December of 1989, about a month and a half after Jacob went missing, the cops finally interviewed Heinrich about his whereabouts on October 22nd. Heinrich said he couldn't remember, and he allowed officers to take samples of his hair. He gave them his shoes, and he let them take his tires. The shoes and the tires were kind of in the ballpark match for the prints at the scene. They weren't like a slam dunk 100%, but they were like, could be. Jared was brought to sit in Heinrich's car, and he said it looked like the one that he had been assaulted
They
in.
put
Which
him
also,
in the car?
I know. Yep.
Every single one of those men are on my list. And if I see them in hell, it's on sight.
What are you going to do on site in hell? Slap them?
Send them to heaven. It's lame there.
The FBI says that law enforcement watched Heinrich for weeks. They searched his father's house, which is where Heinrich said he was living at the time. I don't know if that was true. You know, maybe if they'd gone to Painesville and talked to him in the moment, they would have seen if that was true, or if he was actually living at that other place in Painesville near where all those other boys got assaulted. I don't know. When they searched Heinrich's father's house, they found black boots, camouflage pants, 2 police scanners, and 2 pictures of young boys, one in his underwear and one coming out of a shower in a towel. This is going to make you implode. Heinrich objected to the police confiscating the photos, and he was like, they just don't look right. So they let him have them back, and he burned them. She's violently leaving. She's walking away. She's fully gone. It's shocking. You're like, is this a farce?
In what universe? Yeah, this is a farce. This is what this is. In what universe does that make sense to...
Yeah, just let him have the child sex abuse material back. Yeah, no problem. I don't know, they don't look right. I think he was trying to imply, if I remember from listening to the podcast, I think he was like trying to imply that like he felt like they were planted or doctored or something. But it's like,
how would giving it back prove that?
And like, why does he want them? I think I want them back because they just don't look right.
They don't look right?
Are you fucking kidding me? Okay, so Jared is now brought in for an in-person lineup. And again, he wasn't able to pick out just Heinrich for sure. But he said Heinrich and one other guy could have been the person who assaulted him. So now in 2 lineups, I assume they aren't the same 5 dudes from the photo fit.
Right.
So he's now picked out Heinrich twice. So in early 1990, the FBI and local law enforcement brought Heinrich in to try and get a confession out of him. But Heinrich denied everything, and prosecutors just didn't feel like they had enough to charge him. So they felt like they needed other charges they could level just besides Jacob and Jared's cases. I don't know. I guess Jared picking him out of a fucking lineup twice. I get that is enough to reasonable doubt. He couldn't really just pick him. I get that.
I feel like there have been cases much more tenuous.
Oh, yes.
So...
Oh, if Heinrich was black, I'm sure they would have brought...
Oh, it would have been over.
Yeah. Anyway, they were like, no, we need more cases. And according to the top FBI agent on the case at the time, they had no idea about the Painesville cases. But the thing is, that's not true. One of the publicly available documents in Jacob's case shows that investigators were told about the Painesville assaults in early January 1990, so a couple of months after Jacob went missing.
So at this point, it just actually feels like purposeful sabotage.
Right? The report fell through the cracks about the Painesville assaults, and none of the Painesville boys were interviewed. A boy who was nearly attacked in Painesville went to the cops on the Wetterling case himself. Third child
himself.
Kid. And basically exactly like Adam said, he said investigators didn't seem that interested in his story. They didn't have him do a lineup. They never talked to him again. And they did not search Painesville for Jacob, because if they had, they might have found him in Big Valley where Heinrich had buried him.
Fuck.
And if they'd gone to find Heinrich and searched Painesville the night of Jacob's disappearance, they probably would have solved the case immediately, because per Heinrich himself, it was far from a perfect crime, but more on that later. So for whatever reason, around 2013 or 2014, investigators looked back at the Painesville cases. All of a sudden, a fucking light bulb went off, and they were like,
wow.
Look at this. They also compared DNA from Jared Sherrill's clothing to Heinrich's hair sample, and it was a match.
I swear.
Oh, yeah. Just wait.
God.
because the statute of limitations had run out on Jared's case. So he was not able to do anything about it. Jared, again, just like people, not the cops, just doing the most, he found out about the Painesville boys on his own around this time, and he had started interviewing all of them to just try and get the stories all together. He was like, maybe the cops will listen to this if it's all of us. So statute of limitations had expired for his abduction and assault, but investigators were able to use the DNA match to his case to search Heinrich's home for evidence of Jacob, because they were like, these two cases, we thought they were linked from the beginning. Now we have evidence that he was the guy in this one. On July 28th, 2015, they found bins of boys' clothing, handcuffs, VHS tapes of young boys spanning decades, and a ton of child sex abuse material in Heinrich's home. As Heinrich sat in jail for nearly a year awaiting trial for a bunch of child pornography charges, he had the chance to think about his circumstances. And 3 weeks before his trial, his lawyer offered prosecutors a deal. Let Heinrich plead guilty to one count of child pornography, for which he would be put in jail until he was in his 70s, drop all the other counts, and agree not to prosecute him for Jacob's abduction and murder. And in return, Heinrich would publicly confess to Jacob's killing and lead authorities to his remains.
Shh. Maybe we should reassess our legal justice system.
The prosecutors were like, this might be our only chance to find out where Jacob is. But I'm like, let him sit.
Let him
for another
sit on
minute.
that.
Be like, how about 5 counts and you're in jail for literally ever? Like, Heinrich took law enforcement officers to where he had buried Jacob. When officers arrived in the cow pasture that Heinrich directed them to, they immediately saw what they had been telling everyone to be on the lookout for. A piece of Jacob's red jacket was poking out of the dirt, clear as day. They didn't even need the metal detector that they brought to try and find him. So now that they knew officially that Heinrich was not full of shit, the U.S. attorney confirmed the plea deal. And shortly after this, Heinrich got up in a packed courtroom and confirmed all the horrible things that Geraldo and John Walsh had tried to make Jerry and Patty Wetterling think about 27 years earlier. Things he would now never be convicted for. Heinrich's confession was detailed and horrific, and I will go into it more in a second, but I want to give everybody a chance to breathe here for a second, including you. While I warn you that this is graphic and obviously very, very tragic, and I also want to say that maybe we should take some of it with a grain of salt, because after confessing to Jacob's murder, Heinrich also confessed to Jared Shields' abduction and assault. And he added a disturbing detail that Jared insists isn't true. And Jared was in the courtroom and was listening to him. And Heinrich said that he had forced Jared to perform oral sex on him and then told him, if you throw up, I'll kill you. And Jared doesn't deny, from what I can see, that the oral sex happened, but he's like, he never said that to me. I would remember that. Like, that did not happen. And for some reason, it really felt like a shot at him. I'm not really sure why he felt that that was the case and why he didn't just assume that he was maybe mixing him up with another assault, or like, I don't know, but he felt like he was making it up to like dig at Jared. Like, that's how Jared felt about it. And he was really angry about it and was just like, that didn't happen. He did not say that to me. I know for a fact he didn't say that to me. And I'm kind of more inclined to think like maybe he just mixed up 2 different assaults. Not to invalidate Jared's feelings about it though, but so I wanted to toss it out there because it is possible that Jared is right and he's just like also kind of a fucking liar. So just wanted to establish that Heinrich maybe isn't the completely reliable storyteller. All right. So with that in mind, here is Heinrich's account of what happened to Jacob Wetterling on October 22nd, 1989. At some point that evening, Heinrich got into his dark blue 1982 Ford EXP and drove to St. Joseph from Painesville. He had a police scanner and a .38 revolver in the car with him. When he got to St. Joseph, he saw Jacob, Trevor, and Aaron riding their bikes toward the Tom Thumb, so he parked in a long gravel driveway, presumably Dan's, and waited. And when the boys came back by, he got out of his car, put on a dark mask, and approached them. Once he had taken Jacob, he handcuffed him and put him in the front passenger seat. And I think Jacob might have thought he was a cop with the scanner and the handcuffs, because apparently he asked, "What did I do wrong?" Which breaks me in two. Larkin is crying. I will try not to cry, but I might. Okay. Heinrich drove around long enough to hear the police activity about Jacob's disappearance on his scanner, which means if things had gone differently, they might have found Jacob alive. Heinrich had Jacob bend down in the front seat so no one could see him until they left St. Joseph and then let him sit back up. He brought Jacob to Big Valley, just outside Painesville, about 25 miles from the abduction site. He let Jacob out of the car and removed his handcuffs. He walked Jacob to a row of trees and made him undress. He also took his own clothes off. Then he sexually assaulted Jacob for about 20 minutes. After this, Jacob said he was cold, so Heinrich let him get dressed. And when Jacob asked Heinrich to take him home, Heinrich said he couldn't, and Jacob started to cry. At this point, Heinrich says he saw a squad car driving down the road without its siren on, and he claims he panicked and shot Jacob. And that was it. Then he left his body where it was and drove home, where he stayed for several hours before grabbing a shovel and walking about a mile to where he had left Jacob's body. So Jacob's body was out in the open for a couple of hours. Heinrich tried to dig a hole to bury Jacob, but the shovel was too small, so he walked to a nearby construction site, stole a bobcat, turned the lights on, drove it back to where Jacob's body was. And if you don't know what a bobcat is, it is a large piece of industrial equipment. It's like a fucking excavator or a bulldozer.
It's huge.
Yes.
And the lights are bright.
Yes, and they are not quiet, and they are not small. And at this point, it's past midnight. And he's driving this thing around in the middle of nowhere, basically. So not surprising necessarily that nobody saw him, but like, if the cops had been driving around looking for anything weird. So Heinrich used the bobcat to dig a hole and then put Jacob in it. And then he used the bobcat to cover the hole with dirt and then drove the bobcat back to where he'd taken it from and walked all the way back to the gravesite. And then he tried to cover it with more brush and grass and stuff. Heinrich then realized he had forgotten to bury Jacob's shoes, so he threw them in a nearby ravine before walking home. All of this took hours. For some of those hours, as I said, Jacob's body was just out in the open. And like I said, police are still trying to get a grip on what happened. I don't know when the connection between Jared and Jacob's cases were made, or to Heinrich. It might not have been that night. But when you hear the next part of Heinrich's story, which took place well after investigators were aware of the connection to Jared and Heinrich and of the Painesville attacks, the fact that Jacob wasn't found earlier gets more unforgivable. So about a year after he had buried Jacob, Heinrich returned to the burial site to find it uncovered. He could see Jacob's telltale red jacket. He could see his bones just right out in the open there. So, and this is kind of confusing. Heinrich just says, he was like, I was just out walking around, but he also had a shovel and a garbage bag. So obviously he was like concerned about this for some reason. So Heinrich gathered as many of Jacob's bones as he could and shoved them into the garbage bag with the red jacket. And then he took the bag just across the street, not far from the original site, and dug a hole only about 2 feet deep and put the bag in the hole, covered it up, and left. So Jacob stayed in a shallow grave less than a mile from his murderer's house and less than 30 miles from his own house for the next 2.5 decades.
Woof.
So we'll see if Danny Heinrich lives to see the end of his sentence in another 10 years or so. But for now, I want to stop talking about him and go back to Jacob's parents, Patty and Jerry. Especially Patty, because as I said, she is incredible. She's a freaking force. Like, she's so amazing. Jerry, too, like, for making it through all of this. But, you know, he kind of processed everything in a different way. Like, no matter what, you're always going to blame yourself. Like, even when it doesn't make any sense.
What?
But in this case, I mean, how do you not do it? I can't imagine living with that every single day. And then, like, while Jacob is missing and then knowing what actually happened to him would be crushing. So in the years since Jacob's disappearance, Patty in particular became a fierce advocate for other families with missing children. She co-founded Team Hope, which is a support group for families with missing kids, and that still exists. She also joined and eventually chaired the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She also started writing regular letters to Jacob, just like pouring out her feelings about everything to him. Her advocacy helped enact the 1994 Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act, which required states to implement sex offender registries for those who committed violent sexual crimes or crimes against children. And crucially, this registry was not public. It was only for law enforcement, which Patty has said she never intended it to go past that. She never wanted a public registry.
Which is resilience in and of itself, because that's compassion and humanity.
Exactly.
Like, how do you find that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that struck me about her, is that she has been through this circumstance and is still like, yeah, but it's harmful. So in 1996, the act was amended by Megan's Law, which required public access to the registry. And Patty was an advocate for Megan's Law, so I don't know if she didn't know that that was a part of it or if she turned around on that. I don't know. But she says on the podcast that she was like, I never wanted that to be the case. I think she just wanted to like expand access for law enforcement.
Because apparently they need all the goddamn help they can get.
Seriously. Yeah, no shit. Yeah, like you said, I think that it's a measured and really amazing stance to take given what she went through and recognizing the harm that these registries do, because they do cause harm to a lot of people. Like they destroy careers and lives of people who A, are sometimes totally innocent, B, who have sometimes done something completely innocuous, like, you know, pee on a building when they're drunk. Mm-hmm. It contributes mightily to our homelessness crisis. The registry system, it lacks nuance that I think is needed in this kind of thing in a lot of very problematic ways. And I think it's really admirable, like you said, that Patty recognizes that and objects to it.
When she did not have to. So much strength.
In addition to all this, Patty also twice ran for the Minnesota House of Representatives. She didn't win, but damn, girl, like, where do you find the strength?
Yeah.
So when Heinrich confessed and all of this came out, obviously it was incredibly hard on Jerry and Patty. In addition to having the loss of her son confirmed, Patty felt this kind of sense of self-loss because she had been holding herself out as a symbol of hope to like other people who were in this terrible circumstance. And she was like the mom who never gave up and never stopped believing that like her son would come home. And now she knew he never would. So like, how could she keep being that symbol of hope? But eventually Patty realized she could still do it. She could still hold on to hope. She could still keep doing the work that she had been doing and keep being herself. And she said, quote, "I still believe in the world that Jacob knew and loved. It's a world where children have the right to grow up safe and follow dreams. And that to me is worth fighting for." So in 2023, Patty published her letters to Jacob as a book called Dear Jacob, A Mother's Journey of Hope, which I have not read because I think I would maybe crawl into a cave and never come out. But I'm sure is amazing. And she also has a website, dearjacobbook.com, which I will link in the show notes. And it's not just the book. It's like she publishes videos and articles and like little check-ins and stuff. It's really wholesome. And I think I'm going to start visiting it more because it's really inspiring and really lovely. So that's it.
I'm crushed.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we have some really glaring issues with our justice system. You can have all like glaring evidence given to you by children who went out of their way to bring it to you, and these adults turned their back on them over and over and over.
And I do wonder if there was like a too many cooks in the kitchen situation, like Sheriff Graft calling in like all of the enforcement agencies was probably pretty chaotic, right? Like, I don't know how much communication was happening. You've got the Painesville Police, you've got the Stearns County Sheriff, you've got the FBI, you've got like the Minnesota State investigators. But like the FBI are trained to run that kind of investigation. I start spinning that excuse in my head and then I'm like, it's even more inexcusable than if it was just the sheriff's office who was like, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. Like the FBI is there. What was the crack? Like, how did that Painesville story not get taken to the, you know, the lead FBI and the agent on the case is like, I never heard about that. And it's like, I kind of believe that maybe he didn't. I can also believe that he would lie to cover his ass. But like, I don't know. I can see that with that many people involved and some really apparently shitty detectives running around, like, I don't know. It's like unbelievable. Like you said, it feels intentional, but why would anyone, like, there's no evidence of like Danny Heinrich wasn't influential in the area. He's not.
Yeah, he wasn't like a rich, influential guy.
It's not like the Murdoch, like Alec Murdoch.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's not
that's not the case. And it's just the anecdote of him saying, "What did I do wrong?" That to me is the entire thing. How was that allowed to happen? When 9 months prior, a young boy said this happened to me and nothing was done about it.
I mean, he was investigated, I guess, but yeah, they didn't. They were like, well, not enough.
What is enough?
Do you want to try? And I guess they were like, we don't want to try because we want to see if we can get more evidence and then, you know, actually get him for it. We risk losing. But like, they had so much that was compelling. I mean, he was like, there was a police scanner in the car. What do they find? Police scanners. Like, it's like just the most tragic possible in like nearly every way.
It's just wrong. There's no justice. There's no care.
I can't get over that plea deal either. And like, granted, I am not.
No.
I was never a federal prosecutor. Like, I don't know any of that. But like, I did go to law school, and I know prosecutors and defense attorneys, and I worked in a public defender's office, and I saw, deals happening, not of that, intensity, but like, and I'm also just like, a true crime devourer. I've never heard, and I'm sure now I'm saying never, and somebody will be like, well, actually,
Yeah,
there were like
yeah.
90 cases where this happened, but like, that they didn't even try to get him on 2 count. Like,
Yeah, you're going to roll over that easy?
It just feels impossible that they couldn't have pushed back on that in any way.
Which is just another element of the feeling of like, did anyone care? Did you actually truly care? Because if you do your job. Whew.
Sorry. But I don't know. It's like a case that has just been in my brain literally for as long as I can remember, and people don't know about it, and I wanted to talk about it.
I'm glad you did. Also very not glad because my stomach hurts and I'm filled with an unbridled rage.
That's how you know we're recording.
Incompetence, negligence, not listening to children. When is that cycle going to stop? And it just won't. Every story I hear, my faith is lost even more. The whole power structure is wrong. Instead of a police officer asking Jared, I'm sure not asking, saying, hey, get in that car, be re-traumatized, tell me what you see. Where were the adults there saying, hey, whoa, excuse me, what? You will absolutely not be doing that. He gave you his testimony and you ignored it.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like nowadays it's really common language to talk about like re-traumatization and all of that, but it wasn't back then. Everybody wasn't thinking about that. You know what I mean? Even in the case of a kid. Poor Jared. He's amazing too.
Well, I hate everyone except for Patty. I hate everyone except Patty and Jared.
Like you're going to start doing a list like the jerk when he's I don't need one other thing.
I don't need one other thing.
I need this. I hate everyone but Patty and Jared. Oh, and Jacob. But everyone else I hate.
Everyone else
Patty and Jared and Jacob. Oh, and Jerry, I guess.
And Jerry. And Dan.
Yeah. And poor Trevor and poor Aaron who were there and came so close, and like Trevor watching his like being the one who had convinced his dad. Like Trevor's got to carry that.
Oh my God. I didn't even think about that.
Which of course is the totally natural 10-year-old boy thing to do. And he shouldn't feel guilty about that. And hopefully he's gone to therapy and he doesn't. But like it's impossible as human beings. We just do it. We carry shame and guilt and blame ourselves. Yeah.
Never goes away. Yep. You just learn to live with it. Well, what a joyous time we've had here on this bonus episode.
I warned you.
You did. And it was a good warning. And now I'm going to go write more about children being abused. So great.
We're going to have more coming out. You know, by the time this comes out, you'll have already heard that one. She's doing the Jim Thorpe Indigenous People Day special right now. So recording that one tomorrow. We're really packing it in here. Now it's ruined this couple of days.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, and we're sorry. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.